anxiety about the unknown.
I could hear the steps.
He had all
walking up
black
the
eyes.
stairs.
There was no
All of a sudden,
light
this
in
huge
his eyes.
object with lights was on top
And it
of
made
us.
no sound.
The fear. Yes, this happened.
I not only had visits from the cat, but I began to see things inside my room. Like, for example, faces on the walls as if the wall was moving, and strange things that I remember very vaguely. Fortunately, I was very young.
Hi, and welcome to another episode of Yes, This Happened. Today we will be sharing Bernardo's incredible experience while his family waited for their house to be completed in the state of Mexico. In the 1970s, Bernardo and his family temporarily lived in a house in the Mexican countryside that was home to more than just wild animals. Bernardo will be sharing a story filled with paranormal experiences, dreams, and unexpected warnings.
What I'm going to tell you about happened many years ago. It was maybe 1973. I was approximately 3 or 4 years old, and this happened in a town called Zumpango de la Laguna in the state of Mexico. It was a town where my dad had grown up, and my grandmother still lived there. And my dad was about to buy the family house where we would live, which was located in Ciudad de Mexico. But while we waited for it to be finished, we rented the old house I'm going to talk about. The house we came to rent was a very, very old house. Also, because it was a townhouse, the distribution of this house was typical of a town of that time. And it was in the shape of a horseshoe with a very, very, very large garden. The patio was full of flowering plants and fruit trees. And to be able to access from one room to another, you had to actually leave the room. And there was only a corridor between the rooms or between the house and the garden. As I mentioned, it was a very large garden. In the center, it had a very, very large fountain. It had a type of garage, so to speak, that could fit 4 or 5 cars, and at the back there was even a stable. So it was very common for me to see in the corridor, for example, in the corners of the corridor, there were swallow nests all the time, and we also had turkeys, cows, rabbits, and other animals. The house's main attraction, as I said, was the garden. So the doors of the entire house were made of glass completely. Precisely in order to be able to enjoy its gardens during the day. The only thing that had internal communication was the dining room and the kitchen. And I'm telling you this so that you can imagine the type of house it was. In front of my room there was a large fig tree that I remember at the beginning. It was one of my favorite trees because I would climb it, and being so small, I could lean on its branches and I would eat figs. It was very nice.
Bernardo's family has moved into a beautiful old home in the Mexican countryside, and they enjoy the natural beauty that surrounds it. Although soon, this natural beauty will be overshadowed by the darkness that little by little will disturb them.
Not long after we had moved in, a very, very large cat came down from that fig tree. I don't know if I saw it or perceived it as so big because I was very small, or in fact the cat was too big, like really big, completely black, and the hair was very frizzy, very bristly. Its fur did not look silky, but quite the opposite. He had a very penetrating look. I remember his gaze, his look very well, because since he began to descend from the tree, the cat fixed his gaze on me and did not stop watching me. He came down from the tree, sat in the corridor looking towards my room and looking at me. I would not have given it much importance, but the next day it returned, and with the same attitude. And this began to happen day after day, even though the cat did nothing, the cat began to make me nervous because it was already like a routine. This began to change. The cat began to become restless. It would walk around the entire width of what was the door, and it would reach one end and return to the other, and so on continuously. And all of this without ceasing to see me, without, he was always watching me. So when the cat began to show a little more activity or nervousness, I told my sister, who slept in an adjoining bed. We slept in the same room. And the strangest thing was that she could not see anything. The cat's visits were frequent. There was not a night in which the cat did not visit me, so to speak, I guess. And its attitude became much more aggressive. There came a time when the cat that, just started sitting and watching me was now scratching the door, meowing horribly. I don't know if you ever heard a cat fight. Practically the cat would go and fight against the door to get in. I was very, very scared. I told my parents, and when they saw how nervous and scared I was, they decided to start sleeping with me to see if they saw the cat. Sometimes my mom stayed and I would tell her to look at the cat, that he was there, and she didn't even see or hear anything. Many times when they didn't sleep with me, the cat would come and literally slam against the door. And the door, it was made of glass. It just vibrated and swayed. It was making a lot of noise, and the strangest thing is that nobody heard that noise and nobody saw anything. I was 4 years old, so I was in panic, and as soon as it began to get dark, I was already nervous, afraid of, I knew that I was going to have a visit from this being. This began to affect me in such a way that as soon as it began to get dark, I could no longer be calm, because I knew that as soon as it got dark, the animal was going to be there.
Bernardo's family enjoy their beautiful temporary home in the Mexican countryside, but the natural beauty is marred by the behavior of a black cat that incredibly only Bernardo can see. A cat that will bring darkness with it.
Yes, this happened.
Bernardo shares a story about when he was a child and was startled by the physical appearance of a black cat that only he could see. This cat shows up out of nowhere for no apparent reason and constantly bothers and scares him, causing physical and emotional discomfort and concern from his parents.
There came a time when my nervousness and my fear were so that they took me to the doctor to see if I had some kind of disorder or something wrong with me. If this was my imagination or what was happening. My parents wanted to help me, but they didn't know how. Shortly after, I not only had visits from the cat, but I began to see things inside my room. Like, for example, faces on the walls, as if the wall was moving, and strange things that I remember very vaguely. Fortunately, I was very young, and, all of this feels as if it was a bad dream, but I know it wasn't. But among the things I remember, one night I woke up, and I don't know at what time, I believe it was dawn. However, the light that came through the door into the room was as if it were mid-afternoon, very strong light. However, the door was not made of glass anymore. It was a wooden door, and when I woke up, I didn't know my room. I realized that I was in a completely alien and different room. The only familiar thing was my bed. I got up because there was light and I opened the door to see where I was, what was happening. But when I looked out, I saw that there were huge corridors on both sides of my room. There was a wall in front and there were no other doors. I was very scared. The image was kind of like a hospital corridor or something similar, but there was no other door on either side. So I closed my door, and since the only thing familiar was my bed, I went back to my bed and waited there until morning. I thought that if I got out of there, I was going to get lost. Even later during the day, I heard voices. They pulled my clothes, they pushed me. Very strange things began to happen, and it was not only at night with a cat, but these kinds of manifestations occurred during the day. And just as the cat's visits were continuous, the visits to the doctor also began to be more frequent since my parents didn't know what to do. They were nervous. We began to see different types of shamans, witches, witch doctors.
Bernardo is a well-behaved child, so when he begins having disturbing dreams and becomes nervous and uneasy, his parents know something is wrong. However, they don't believe his reports of a cat that no one else can see. That is, until a fateful day, when they receive a warning from an unexpected person that causes them to take Bernardo's experience seriously.
My father tells me that one day, without looking for her, he was approached in the town Zocalo by a mysterious old woman, who he says he had never seen and never saw again after that day. She told him that she was there to help him, that she knew they had doubts, that they probably didn't believe me, and that most likely they weren't going to believe her. But if they didn't do what she told them, I would most likely die. That what was happening was not a manifestation of ghosts or some kind of spirit, that demons lived in that house. That I was a child who had the ability to see things that other people cannot see. That if I developed them, I could open portals that other people cannot see. But just as I saw good things, there could be bad things, and that, any decision that they would make, they shouldn't talk about it inside the house. She said that all this, she was telling my dad he should consult with my mom, but not inside the house, because if this being knew that they were going to move from there or change or do something, we were never going to be able to get rid of it, because it was always going to follow us until it could take over my soul. So my father, with all his skepticism, talked about it with my mother, as his lady recommended, outside the house. And we left the house without taking any clothes with us, without saying that we were leaving. In fact, I didn't even know where we were going. It was like a normal day. And it was a very happy day. I remember because from there we went to see the new house. It was very exciting that they had already delivered it to my dad in Mexico City. And from that day on, we never went back to that house, to the old house. My dad later sent for the furniture and the clothes, and I remember that on the second or third day, we were already living there. And we stayed for a couple of days, maybe a week, at an uncle's house. While all of our belongings were delivered, apparently everything was very secretive. And fortunately for me, when we arrived at my new house, in Ciudad de Mexico, I never saw anything again or heard anything. Even the fear of the night disappeared. The fear of the afternoons was gone. I was already medicated because of how nervous I was and the fear that I had. And I don't know how, all this affected my family. But I do remember that in that old house, one day my mom would sleep with me, and then another day my dad, and even though they were sleeping with me, they never saw or heard anything. And my sister didn't see anything either. So for me, it was a relief to be able to move and be able to be in a place where I could live in peace.
The years go by, and a chance encounter with the old property encourages Bernardo's father to confess the rest of the story. A story that makes Bernardo realize how lucky he was when he was a child.
When I was maybe about 17 years old, we drove past the old house, and my dad asked me if I remembered it. And I said, yeah, of course. And because when we moved, they never talked about it again, he finally told me, I hadn't wanted that to tell you because of everything you went through, but when we left, 2 different families came to live to this house. One of the families was even dragged from their rooms to the patio, and then they were dragged out of the house. And the other family, which was the one that struck me the most, was a family with a baby. And they say that having lived there for more or less 3 months, the child, who was a newborn, cried out with a scream that was not that of a baby of his age. So when the mother went to see what was happening, she found her son dead, and he had died of suffocation. So they don't know how to explain all of this, but I lived it, and I do understand what happened to that child. Fortunately, I think that after having gone through this experience, it did not affect me, because fortunately, I remember it like a dream. However, I can tell you that to date, I get to see and hear things that don't scare me, but I know that not everyone can see or hear them.
Bernardo's story shows us that there is an invisible world beyond our understanding that doesn't always have our best interest at heart. This world can sometimes intersect with our own, leading to paranormal events. Bernardo's story remains with us as proof of paranormal events that transcended their dimension to meet us at ours. What do you think?